Her name was Hatshepsut. She was one of Egypt's greatest rulers when it dominated the ancient world. But how did a woman become so powerful in a society run solely by men? What was the legacy of her reign? Discover the extraordinary destiny of the queen who became Pharaoh. November 26, 1922, British Egyptologist Howard Carter was about to make one of the most sensational discoveries of all time. He had just discovered the intact tomb of the pharaoh Tutankhamun, revealing the fabulous funerary artifacts of this largely forgotten king. Tutankhamun was only a child when he took the Egyptian throne over 3,300 years ago. As the last heir of a family that had ruled Egypt for 8 generations, he was descended from some of the most fascinating characters of antiquity. The pharaoh queen Hatshepsut, the sublime Nefertiti, as well as the enigmatic Akhenaten. Egyptologists know this family as the 18th dynasty that saw Egypt become the richest and most powerful realm in the world. This is the story of their incredible golden age, the founders of the new kingdom. Hatshepsut was born about 1500 years BCE, at the start of the 18th dynasty. Brought up at the center of power, she could have been relegated to oblivion, as so many princesses were.
Egyptian society was essentially patriarchal. Men had their roles, as did women. It was totally gendered.
Men could rule. Women could be consorts of the king, and they could give birth to boys who, of course, would become king, but women could not rule on their own alone.
Scarcely more than a child, did the young princess Hatshepsut already imagine becoming queen, then king of Egypt, as only one other woman had before her.
We had a time in the 12th dynasty where a royal princess, Sobeknofru, did become king. She lasted about 6 years, but very little of her monuments have survived, and they do actually look as if they were attacked. So there was not a huge precedent for a woman being on the throne.
300 years before Hatshepsut, Sobekneferu ruled Egypt during wartime. She only reigned due to the royal family's lack of a male heir.
We only see about 5 women in all of Egyptian history, over 3,000 years, who rose to the level of pharaoh. So it's an extraordinary deviance from the norm.
So who was Hatshepsut? And how did she succeed in overturning tradition to enter history? Hatshepsut was the daughter of Thutmose I, king of Egypt. Her mother, Ahmose, was known as Thutmose's great royal wife. Oddly enough, Hatshepsut's father was not the biological son of the pharaoh, but his right-hand man, a sort of adoptive son. Hence, he was not of royal blood. However, Hatshepsut's mother was probably a direct descendant of the glorious Ahmose I, founder of the new kingdom. As the great-granddaughter of a king worshipped by all Egyptians, Hatshepsut was of divine royal blood.
As the daughter of the king and his great royal wife, Hatshepsut was dynastically legitimate, but still only a woman. To be pharaoh of all Egypt, a man was needed.
Whilst growing up, Hatshepsut lost 2 brothers and a sister and was to be her parents' only living child. When her father, Thutmose I, died, there was only one male heir, the son of a secondary wife. His gender ensured his succession, and he became Thutmose II.
He was clearly less legitimate than Hatshepsut, almost a bastard. The pharaohs had several wives, but it was the great royal wife that was meant to give birth to the legitimate successor.
In order to strengthen Thutmose II's weak dynastic link, he was married to his half-sister Hatshepsut. Around 1481 BCE, she became the new queen of Egypt by marriage.
Hatshepsut had a great amount of legitimacy. She even was able to bring this legitimacy, this aura of royal identity, to enhance that of her half-brother, Thutmose II.
So when you think about it, Thutmose II, her husband, actually doesn't have any real royal blood in him. So she's the one with the purity of the line.
Hatshepsut, well versed in affairs of state from childhood, also gave her husband the experience he lacked.
She probably learned this on the knee of her father, Thutmose I. There is some suggestion that she may have accompanied her father on a Nubian campaign during his reign, but it is clear that she did learn from her father how the office of pharaoh worked.
Hatshepsut taught her half-brother and husband all she had learned from their father and became indispensable to his reign.
The 2 of them ruled together for at least some period of time. No one really knows the length of the reign that he had, but he certainly is very much in the shadows as a king. Probably on his behalf, they begin to build monuments here in Karnak Temple.
Scattered fragments from 2 obelisks erected to Thutmose II were found at Karnak, the most important religious sanctuary of the 18th dynasty kings. However, Hatshepsut was not prepared to meekly accept the second-class role of queen. The details of her slow rise to power are concealed, not at Karnak, but at another monument that she had built at the start of her husband's reign. It is on the Nile's west bank, at the foot of a steep limestone cliff. Egyptologist and art historian Belinda Hartwig showed us the architectural marvel built for Hatshepsut, the Temple of Deir el-Bahari.
So here we are. We are at the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. Its ancient name, it was called Djeser-Djesru, or the Holy of the Holy. If you look in front of you, you can see 3 colonnades that rise up against this cliff bay. And this particular way of constructing mortuary temples was the first time that it was done, and it sets actually the standard for the rest of the 18th dynasty. While we look around, we can see that it's a little barren, but during antiquity, it was absolutely breathtaking. You would have had 2 T-shaped pools on either side of the causeway. And then the causeway was also lined with granite sphinxes that went all the way down to the Valley Temple. These T-shaped pools were surrounded by trees, lush foliage, tamarisk, persea, sycamore trees, so that you can almost imagine Hatshepsut walking down the causeway, taking a look at how everything was coming together, and probably being pretty pleased.
Although designed as a mortuary temple, it never became a tomb. Hatshepsut was never buried there. From the beginning, it was a place of worship dedicated to the queen and the god Amun. Why did this god play such a key role in her story? The name Amun means the hidden one, and he is recognizable by his crown of 2 vertical plumes.
He was a god, a creator of worlds, such as the sun god Ra in northern Egypt. In fact, during the 18th dynasty, the 2 gods fused to become Amun-Ra.
From the start of the dynasty, Amun was the god of the royal family. As the lord of the Karnak sanctuary at Thebes, his statue was the object of much veneration.
In his Karnak sanctuary temple, it was thought that this was not a mere statue in the Holy of Holies, but an idol which embodied him and led to the statue being worshipped on a daily basis.
Hatshepsut was deeply involved in the worship of the god Amun, since she was more than just the wife of King Thutmose II. As queen, she also bore the title of wife of the god Amun.
She thus had 2 husbands, her brother the Pharaoh, and Amun, the god of royalty. This was highly symbolic and would guarantee the legitimacy to the throne of any son she might bear.
This religious office was the highest that any woman could hold in ancient Egypt.
It also was an amazing way of her accessing the wealth, tremendous wealth that was at the hands of the Amun priesthood. She did use that office in order to gain more power, in order to link herself with the priests of Amun-Ra. So it was a very pivotal office that Hatshepsut took.
Hatshepsut thus used her religious power to establish her political authority. In order to understand how she did this, the Karnak sanctuary must be meticulously explored. Betsy Bryan, who has been studying the site for 40 years, is one of the greatest specialists. She showed us the walls of the Red Chapel, a building which housed a ritual barge and a statue of Amun. Built by Hatshepsut, it was reconstructed to show how it was during the Egyptian Empire.
The god's wife role was a very important one that was the high priestess in the temple. And here we have one of the rare examples of the illustration of the full daily liturgy that was done every single day for the god Amun-Ra. And so what we start with in the beginning of the day is making sure that these priests are completely pure. So what we see here is a jar of water with this wavy, rippling line. That is actually water that is purifying the priests. And they're standing in this rectangle, which is the sacred lake of Karnak.
Within the Karnak shrine, Hatshepsut, the queen and high priestess of Amun, was also subjected to ritual purification. Before appearing to her divine spouse, she had to cleanse her body of impurity by immersing herself in sacred temple water. She was assisted by the divine adoratress and other priestesses. Once washed, her body was anointed with perfumed oils. Only then could she go to the heart of the shrine, where the god Amun was waiting.
When they are done, they then now begin to proceed to open the shrine that held the god. And they bring his statue out, they change his clothes, they give him makeup, they provide him with everything he needs for the day. And then they begin to actually call him to eat. Wake up, there's food just ready, come and have your breakfast. So the daily liturgy works very much as it does for human beings, that you get the god up, you get him dressed, you get him ready, but you want to make sure that you're ritually pure enough to encounter him. Of course, there's one additional role that the high priest doesn't have. Otherwise, there would be no need to have a feminine version. The god's wife was quite literally a wife, so she performs a sexual act for the god. So that would have involved her performing a masturbation on the statue in order to excite the god. And when that god then had an orgasmic ejaculation, that was creative. It was the procreation of the land. To keep, let's say, the cycle of life going.
This explains why the Karnak temple walls represent the god Amun in both his classical role and his procreational role with erect penis, but always crowned with two plumes. Since Amun, her divine husband, resided in Karnak, she had her own temple built on the Nile's opposite bank. She could thus welcome Amun to her new temple for the great religious festivals celebrated on the West Bank. During the festivals, Amun's statue would leave Karnak in a ceremonial barge in order to cross the Nile and do the rounds of the dead king's temples. After which, Amun would spend the night in the temple of his wife, Hatshepsut.
So we're in the sanctuary, and this is where the statue of Amun-Ra would have resided. It's also where his bark would have been taken during the 3-day festival of the Western Valley.
This important festival was celebrated around the 20th of March. It coincides with the spring equinox when a particular phenomenon takes place in the shrine at sunrise.
So this is the sanctuary, and it has a special layout. You can see here the light that's coming here through the window. Now, the statue would have been placed on a plinth right in here. And during this time, during the beautiful festival of the Western Valley, the light would illuminate the statue through two windows, a window up here and in a window here. Amun-Ra was a sun god, and this sunlight was meant to enliven the statue to make sure the statue would continue to live. So on these walls surrounding us are the family members of Hatshepsut, and they retained the absolute vibrant colors that they had in antiquity. So our cast of characters are Thutmose I over here, her father, followed by her mother, Ahmosa. Below is the representation of her husband, Thutmose II. And then back over here, we have a representation of her daughter, Nefertiti, one of the only representations we have of her daughter. They're here to celebrate eternally Hatshepsut's cult, but also to celebrate the cult of Amun-Ra.
If Hatshepsut established herself as a pious queen to Amun, she could then call on Amun's help to see her through future problems. Around 1479 BCE, about 3 years after the start of his reign, the health of Thutmose II failed. Hatshepsut's half-brother and husband did not have long to live.
Thutmose II was not a healthy specimen. He had an enlarged heart, probably had problems breathing. His mummy shows he had lesions all over his body, and he was very, very young.
Of poor constitution, Thutmose II died prematurely, leaving Hatshepsut at a loss.
The succession was once more in question. It was particularly dangerous for Hatshepsut, Thutmose's widow.
Hatshepsut was in danger. There was no male heir. The couple's only child was a daughter, the Princess Nefertiti. Since the crown could only be transmitted to a son, Hatshepsut's future was at risk.
It was a potential blessing to rivals. Thutmose II wasn't of the Ahmosa dynasty, so why not change altogether? Another noble could have seized power.
In order to preserve her dynasty and her interests, Hatshepsut had to act quickly. Before his death, Thutmose II had fathered sons to secondary wives. Like their father, these small children had no common bloodline with the dynasty's founders, but had the right gender to reign. As the only legitimate descendant, Hatshepsut intended to hold on to power. She would thus manipulate the will of the god Amun to control the new child king.
It was Amun who officially chose the new pharaoh. He was considered to be an oracular god that made his choices known. He could be questioned, but would sometimes reveal his will without being asked. This defines a theocracy. In a democracy, the people elect their leader, whereas in a theocracy, God chooses his earthly representative. One might thus suppose that Hatshepsut and Amun's clergy carefully orchestrated the result.
She already was a powerful woman. She obviously had contact with some of the most powerful elites and officials of the time. So perhaps it's not too surprising that she's not going to sit back quietly, but rather begin to do things on her own.
Officially, the god Amun designated the new child king, Thutmose III. The god's choice legitimized him. This elaborate stage production ensured that Hatshepsut and Amun's clergy preserved their interests. In gratitude, the priests supported the queen as head of the state, and she became regent to Thutmose III.
Hatshepsut was trying to preserve the dynasty. Maybe she wanted to make sure that he was going to be okay and there wouldn't be some kind of uprising in the palace because he was son of a minor wife and not from the fully royal bloodline that Hatshepsut was.
And Hatshepsut made her mark on the country as an astute and wise leader with good advisors.
Hatshepsut was clearly a real judge of personalities and knew how to pick people who were ambitious and also skilled. I mean, it's been pointed out that none of the men who worked for her were married. She chose unmarried men, or at least men who didn't have a wife in their tomb that we can point to. She wanted them 24 hours a day.
She employed geniuses. These were intellectuals at the time who were brought into her court and were asked to come together to create new visions.
Amongst these brilliant men, one stood out in particular. His name was Senenmut.
Senenmut was Hatshepsut's royal steward. He was an administrative counselor and also chief architect to the queen, and a brilliant one at that. Hatshepsut's famous temple and masterpiece, Deir el-Bahari, was built under his direction.
And he is also, by Hatshepsut, given the responsibility for watching over her daughter. He made sure that she was raised and protected, and in fact, he dedicated a whole series of statues that show him holding Nefertiti. And it, in a sense, welded him to Hatshepsut. It made him almost a member of that family.
As well as Hatshepsut's trusted advisor, her daughter's steward and architect of her mortuary temple, Senenmut was also the royal steward of the Karnak temple. Yet another sign shows the unique place he had in the queen's life. It can be seen at Deir el-Bahari. In close proximity to the temple, Senenmut was allowed to have his own tomb dug. An extraordinary privilege for someone not of royal blood.
Alhamdulillah. ممكن نروح تحت إن شاء الله. شكرا.
The Egyptologist Stephen Harvey showed us this unique place, generally closed to the public, which is buried deep beneath Hatshepsut's monument at over 100 meters down.
Wow, this is an amazing thing. Here we've got an actual ink sketch of Senenmut, and we know for sure it's Senenmut, not just from the portrait, which shows even the wrinkles on his face. So he's shown as an older man wearing a nice linen shirt, but in front of it, it says that he's the overseer of the house of Amun. So it's a kind of unusual, casual sketch made by a highly skilled artist, maybe even Senenmut himself, who knows.
At the end of the tunnel is a small, highly decorated room that one can barely stand up in.
This is the tomb of Senenmut, and we can see his immense importance in his names here on the ceiling because they're immediately next to the names of Queen Hatshepsut. And it was Hatshepsut who elevated him from a very lowly birth. This is an amazing thing. It's the first astronomical ceiling that we have in all of Egypt. And what's extraordinary is the first one is in a private tomb, not a royal person's tomb. And it shows us the kind of intellectual interest that Senenmut must have had, but also the scientific knowledge that was collected at this time. The constellations, including the Big Dipper, are shown here. And we also see the 12 months of the year laid out in 30 days each to show the Egyptian year of 360 days plus the extra 5 days, totaling up to the recognition of 365 days per year. So time moves across this ceiling, and the night sky, which represents the eternity of Senenmut's afterlife, is also shown here.
Senenmut was clearly an extraordinary character. But what was the exact nature of his relationship with Hatshepsut? And why was he so favored by her? An unfinished tomb dug into the heart of the cliff overlooking the temple encloses elements that have fed the rumors since antiquity. The place is known as the Scribe's Grotto. The site is difficult to get to and closed to the public, but the Egyptologist Melinda Hartwig was given access. This was the first time she had seen it.
As you can see, there are a number of graffiti that are written all over the walls. Now, these were written by high officials and clergy, as well as workmen who were working on the mortuary temple, probably in their off hours. And the earliest that we have is this. It is the figure of a man. He's holding implements of his office, seated on a lion-legged chair, and above it identifies him as Senenmut. He was, without a doubt, the most important and powerful official during the reign of Hatshepsut.
But further back in the grotto is the drawing which has fueled so much speculation.
It depicts a woman bent over and a man entering her from behind in a sexual posture. She's wearing a wig, and he seems to be wearing some kind of a workman's hat. Now, this has been said to be Hatshepsut, entered by Senenmut. And this has been followed in the literature. But there's absolutely nothing to back that up whatsoever.
Although the drawing dates from Hatshepsut's reign, no names identify its protagonists. the expert thinks the interpretation is mistaken.
In ancient Egypt, there was a concept called decorum, which was that there was certain morals and values that you followed, and you would not draw the queen in a pose like this. Something as blatant as this is just not within the decorum of ancient Egypt.
Melinda has another hypothesis drawn from Hathor, goddess of love, who was worshipped in the mountains. During festivals dedicated to Amun, it was not only the god and goddess that had sex to regenerate the land, their human worshippers followed their lead.
Part of the festivities had to do with drinking a ton of alcohol, spiked alcohol. And what this was to do is it was to open the mind so that they could communicate with the dead. During that time, of course, people got quite drunk and stuff like this happened all the time. So this could have very easily been someone watching what was going on and just made a little graffito to memorialize it.
It cannot be confirmed that Hatshepsut and Senenmut were lovers. What we do know, however, is that the queen and regent to the infant Thutmose III relied heavily on Senenmut's competence. But to become a pharaoh and create her legend, she turned to the god Amun. Hatshepsut was the wife of God. But what would happen when Thutmose III was of an age to take a wife who would replace her in that role? She anticipated the eventuality by becoming the daughter of god Amun. She had the title engraved in stone in her Temple of Deir el-Bahari. Today, these engravings are almost illegible, but Melinda Hartwig explained their relevance to Hatshepsut's future.
So the scene we're looking at here is the divine birth of Hatshepsut. And let me explain what we're looking at. You have the god Amun-Ra, and he is in the guise of Hatshepsut's father, Thutmose I. And then you've got Hatshepsut's mother sitting opposite Amun on a bed. He is holding and handing the sign of life to her, and she's with her hand cupping the god's elbow, which is close as it gets to sex at this time in ancient Egypt. So this is the act of conception. This is how Hatshepsut was born, and it also shows without a doubt that Hatshepsut is the divine offspring of Amun-Ra.
It was both a theological and a poetic way of justifying the origin of her power. She was the daughter of Amun as well as his wife. Fulfilling both these roles was neither ideologically nor symbolically contradictory to the Egyptians.
She believed and wanted the people to believe that she was born of Amun-Ra directly. She went with the full fiction of using the complete story. You could call it propaganda, but it's really not even done as propaganda. It's not arguing it. It's putting it on a wall and saying, this is it.
One might say she was a master storyteller, capable of rewriting and thus creating her destiny.
The destiny of a princess, then a queen who should have retired gracefully because she was a woman. By proclaiming herself daughter of god Amun, she added to her dynastic right the divine right to reign. Her transformation into pharaoh can be read on what remains of her monuments.
There are not many buildings surviving here in Karnak because they've always been replaced. So you have to go looking and to find them. And here in Karnak, if you look, you will find an unusual thing that tells you more about her story. And this block, which came from a doorway, tells us how she transformed from queen to king. Now she is completely male. She wears a man's royal kilt. She has the royal beard on her chin. She wears the Nemes headdress, which only kings would wear. And she is now completely masculinized. She went from being what was called a queen who was in charge to being truly a king serving as a male heir of Amun-Re.
After 7 years as regent to Thutmose III, Hatshepsut took the highest masculine status for her own. She was crowned pharaoh in the Temple of Karnak.
As a crowning, it was a very odd affair. It went totally against all accepted pharaonic tradition because there was already a pharaoh. Hatshepsut should have continued reigning as regent, as she had from the 1st to the 7th year. But suddenly there was a co-regency with 2 pharaohs.
In the
7th year of Thutmose III's reign, when he was at an age to claim his inheritance, meaning that Hatshepsut's regency would no longer be required, she moved to make herself pharaoh. She alluded to it in this passage. I became aware of being a capable ruler and took what he laid before me. He, meaning Amun. She performed the role of pharaoh, ordering the extraction of obelisks, which was the king's job. She did it because Amun had sent her signs to say, "You are pharaoh," which justified it. It's worth seeing it through her eyes, as technically it was a coup d'etat, because she seized power belonging to another.
This was truly a new type of royalty. She innovated in order to get round the problem of her gender, which was incompatible with the pharaonic institution.
Officially, Hatshepsut and Thutmose III were sharing power.
You had a senior partner and a junior partner. And the junior partner is usually young and virile and goes to war. And that's what Thutmose III is sent off to do. He's really operating on her behalf and sharing that throne.
Thutmose III executed his co-regent's orders. He left to secure the borders with Nubia in southern Egypt. In his absence, Hatshepsut worked at enshrining her legend. In Amun's name, she organized an expedition that would be remembered as the high point of her reign, engraved in detail on the walls of her mortuary temple.
Right after Hatshepsut was crowned in her year 7, She was asked by the god Amun-Ra to have an expedition led to the land of Punt. She had to put together a group of men and ships, drag them across the desert, and then launch them in the Red Sea, where they sailed 1,600 kilometers to the land of Punt. Now, we believe Punt was around the Horn of Africa, probably the modern country of Eritrea.
Hatshepsut made sure to send her finest artists on this expedition, their mission being to transfer what they had seen to the walls of her temple on their return.
Now, why did the expedition go? It was to get incense. It was to get myrrh trees. It was to get things that were needed for the worship of the god Amun-Ra. The gods resided in the heavens, so when you would light the incense, it would please the god's nose. So this was critical in the worship of the gods. The most important part of the scene we get is right here. This is the Queen of Punt, Itu, and her husband, Pharaoh, and they are holding their hands in gestures of respect. Now, in front here is the messenger of the king, and they're making this trade. He is bringing ingots of gold and various goods, and they are giving the messenger of the king this mound of incense that can be used for temple cult ceremonies.
Apart from large quantities of resin, the Egyptians uprooted and took myrrh and incense trees from the land of Punt. They loaded them onto their boats, complete with the roots. On returning to Thebes, the trees were replanted in the gardens of Hatshepsut's temple. This unusual expedition meant that Egypt became autonomous in the production of incense and myrrh, vital to their religious ceremonies.
The reason Hatshepsut did this expedition was to show her power as pharaoh. And it was international trade under the veil of religious piety.
By sending this essentially holy expedition to the land of Punt, she ensured the good relations of her people with the god Amun.
After 22 years on the Egyptian throne, 15 of which were shared with Thutmose III, the pharaoh queen Hatshepsut died, probably of natural causes. She was about 50 years old.
Not surprisingly, Thutmose III continued to reign. He reigned alone, and about 20 years later, he initiated the destruction of some of Hatshepsut's images.
Her image was completely erased from her monument. Her statues were broken. The reliefs were defaced. So Egyptologists thought this was his anger at being sidelined, at being not the major partner in the co-regency. And this is not the case.
Thutmose III probably did not destroy her images or name out of anger or vengeance. Betsy Bryan is sure of it. Her thesis was recently proved by the discovery of statues of the pharaoh queen at Karnak during work on a temple doorway added by Thutmose III.
Yeah, this one also calls her daughter of Re. This one's in better condition. To be honest with you, when I first started coming out here 45 years ago, nobody knew they were here. You know, they really were refound because they were working on the pylon itself. Hatshepsut made these statues of herself seated in the form of an Osiris and that were associated her to the kingship as king. And they built masonry stone in front of it and hid all of her statues, a whole row of them. They didn't take them out. They didn't even, from what we can tell, probably destroy them. Her names are intact, but they completely hid them, hoping that no one would ever see that they are here.
Thutmose III also concealed two of Hatshepsut's obelisks, of which only one remains standing. He incorporated them into a new building. Only their tips can be seen above the roof. Thus, all inscriptions and references to Hatshepsut are invisible to anyone at ground level.
For more than 20 years, nothing was done to get rid of her memory, but suddenly, because Thutmose III is seeing the end of his lifetime, and he wants his son to succeed him, and he doesn't want there to be any question about who's legitimate, they began to hide her monuments.
It was clearly linked to questions surrounding the succession. Thutmose III erased any trace of Hatshepsut's time as pharaoh. Metaphorically speaking, he wiped any trace of her reign from history.
Yet, he didn't systematically destroy all representations of Hatshepsut. In fact, they actually made a rather good team. However, Thutmose III wanted to remove all traces of the historical anomaly that constituted the reign of a pharaoh queen.
Thus ends the story of Hatshepsut's reign, known by Egyptologists as one of the brightest periods of ancient Egyptian history. It was a time of peace and commercial expansion where no Egyptian went hungry and architecture and the arts truly flourished.
She was a good pharaoh, and I think that she's quite the modern woman for an ancient age. She took the opportunities that were presented to her, and she made something of them.
He was one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs.
He's really one of the greatest kings of his time.
From the Colossi of Memnon to the Temple of Luxor, he built the largest statues and shrines.
We see an explosion of monumental building on a scale that had never been seen before.
Egypt shone brightly during his reign.
It was truly Egyptian civilization's golden age.
Yet his name has been almost forgotten. Discover the incredible story of Amenhotep III, the forgotten pharaoh.